Hey, this is Nick Duffel with Deeply Rooted. And the goal of Deeply Rooted is to provide teaching that will equip and encourage believers to become disciple makers. And so for this very first teaching, I thought it would be good to talk about discipleship and making disciples, like a short orientation video of disciple making, so to speak. And here's the deal. Jesus is calling every single person to follow him as a disciple of Jesus. That call is open to all. And then every Christian who responds to that call, every Christian is called to be a disciple maker. So every believer should understand that they are a disciple of Jesus and that they are called to make disciples of Jesus. Now, this is an uphill battle because it's difficult to be a disciple of Jesus. It's difficult to make disciples. It's countercultural to pursue discipleship. But Jesus calls us to it. And the last thing that Jesus said to his disciples, these people that he had spent 3 years with, these last words are recorded in Matthew 28:18 through 20. And it says that Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." These are two very important statements to notice in these verses. The first one is in the beginning, when Jesus says, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." So let me paraphrase. Jesus is saying, what I'm about to tell you is not optional. He isn't saying, hey, if you have time, you should make disciples. Like, if you get around to it, make disciples of all nations. No, he says, I have the authority, all the authority. How much authority? All of it. I have all the authority. Therefore, I say to you, with that authority, go and make disciples. Making disciples is not optional. So that's the first statement. The last statement that Jesus says is, I am with you always to the very end of the age. So even though at this very moment Jesus is about to physically depart from his disciples, he tells them, I will be with you always. What he means is that he's going to be with them by his Holy Spirit. His Holy Spirit is going to come into their lives. He's going to empower them to make disciples. So Jesus commissions us to make disciples. And then he says, I will be with you, then empowering us to make disciples, which leads us to the obvious question. If we have the command and we have the empowering, then why don't we make disciples? Well, why isn't this happening in many churches in America? Writer Dallas Willard says that non-discipleship is the elephant in the church, now, and specifically in the American church. And there are a lot of immature believers in the church, which is okay if they're new believers. But there are people who have been Christians for a very long time, and they still are immature in their faith because they have not been discipled. And if they haven't been discipled, then how can they make disciples? We can't lead people somewhere that we haven't been or that we aren't willing to go. We can't make disciples if we ourselves aren't following Jesus as his disciples. So what's the issue? Why aren't we carrying out the commission of Jesus the way we should? Well, it's pretty simple. There's two reasons. The first one is we don't know what a disciple looks like, and then we also don't know how to make one. The best place to learn, though, what a disciple looks like and how to make one, though, is to look at the master himself, to look at Jesus. And so we're going to do that for the next few weeks. We're going to simply look at Jesus. We're going to look at his actions. We're going to look at his interactions with others. We're going to look at his teaching. We're going to look at all of that. And we're going to learn together what it means to be a disciple and what it means to be a disciple maker. We're going to develop a kind of a portrait of a disciple. We're going to answer the question, what does it look like to be a disciple? What does it look like to follow Jesus with your life? And so in this video, I just want to give a simple overview of that portrait of a disciple. Making disciples can be captured really in two words, and that is reaching and leading. So Jesus says, go make disciples of every nation, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey all that I have commanded. So if we take those words seriously, we know our mission is to reach people for Christ, one person at a time, and we want to see people make a commitment to Jesus and to express that commitment then through baptism. And We want to teach people to do all that Jesus commanded. We want to lead them toward living Jesus-centered lives. So the best environment for a person to learn to follow Jesus is an environment of relational discipleship, what we call a relational environment. And this isn't just learning. This isn't sitting in rows, reading a book, listening to a lecture. This is life-on-life discipleship. One person leading another person as they are in relationship with one another. And you're leading that person into a deeper relationship with Jesus to have a more and more Jesus-centered life. And so this is life-on-life discipleship. And in a relational environment, people really know each other. This is an environment of encouragement, of challenge. When you know someone, you can specifically challenge them and encourage them in those ways that very, very much apply to their lives, very specific to their lives. And this is why Jesus spent time with these men and women. He lived life with them. Jesus spent time teaching crowds, yes, but he spent a lot more time discipling a small group of people, of men and women. And so Jesus made relational discipleship central to his mission. And so in the same way, we need to make relational discipleship central to our mission, our life's mission. So what does this look like? Well, I want to give you an overview of what a disciple looks like. Let's look at two more scriptures from the book of Matthew. And we already looked at Jesus' final words to his disciples before returning to God. Now let's rewind. Let's look at how Jesus first called his disciples in the first place. So this is from Matthew chapter 4. And it says, starting in verse 18, it says, as Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into a lake, for they were fishermen. It's a good thing they were fishermen, because if they were casting that net without being fishermen, that would be weird. But Jesus says, come follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people. And at once they left their nets and followed him. Just think about that. They just left. And then going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately, again, they left their boat and their father and followed him. So Jesus says, come follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people. And I love how it says that Peter and Andrew just dropped everything right at that moment to follow Jesus. And then same thing for James and John. They're with their father. The text mentions in this case, they were with their father and they left him, not just the nets, but a person behind to follow Jesus. And you know what? James and John's father would have been thrilled that his sons were being called by a rabbi, a Jewish teacher. When a rabbi like Jesus, a Jewish teacher calls you, you don't ask questions, you don't push back, you just go. Because this is a very high honor. A far higher honor than any simple fisherman has any right to expect, that a rabbi would come along and call them to follow him. Let's go, Jesus says. And so they go. And I just want to take a closer look at what Jesus says. He says, come and follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people. Remember, we're exploring what it looks like to be a disciple of Jesus. And there are three elements to what Jesus says. There are three elements to being a disciple of Jesus. Loving God, loving others, and living missionally. Loving God, loving others, living missionally. And we see these three elements in the call of Jesus. Jesus says, come follow me. When he says, come follow me, he's saying, come learn the heart of God. Come see the heart of God in action. And when we see Jesus, we see God. When we fall in love with Jesus, we fall in love with God. Come follow me. Love God. And at the simplest level, a disciple is someone who loves God and follows Jesus. Jesus also says, you will fish for people. Jesus came to save people, love people, show God's heart for people. These men and women that Jesus called to follow him, they got to see him interact with people. They got to see him heal people, argue and debate with people. They got to eat with him and other people, hear him teach people. And when we read about Jesus, we tend to focus on the things that Jesus said. But we also need to pay attention to the things that Jesus did. Many of us have Bibles, and the words of Jesus in the Bibles are printed in red, which is great. But I once heard someone suggest that maybe we should also print the actions of Jesus in green, as in green means go, like go do these same things. So what did Jesus do? He loved others. He came as a human being to this earth. He demonstrated his love for human beings. So a disciple of Jesus is going to do the same thing. We're going to love others. In Matthew chapter 22, Jesus is asked a very important question, and the person who asks the question is trying to trap Jesus in his own words. But Jesus sees through the trap. He gives this incredible answer. So let's look at this. It's in Matthew 22. This person comes and says, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And so Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." So Jesus quotes two Old Testament scriptures, Deuteronomy 6:5, which is known as the Shema. It's a very famous verse. And then Jesus quotes Leviticus 19:18, which is a less famous verse, but it's a verse that so beautifully shows the heart of God for people. And I just want to read some verses to you from Leviticus 19 in context, this verse that Jesus quotes from. So starting in verse 13, this is what it says, Leviticus 19. This is the law of Moses. So these are some laws that God gives to his people. "Do not defraud or rob your neighbor. Do not make your hired workers wait until the next day to receive their pay. Do not insult the deaf or cause the blind to stumble. You must fear your God. I am the Lord. Do not twist justice in legal matters by favoring the poor or being partial to the rich and powerful. Always judge people fairly. Do not spread slanderous gossip among your people. Do not stand idly by when your neighbor's life is threatened. I am the Lord. Do not nurse hatred in your heart for any of your relatives. Confront people directly so you will not be held guilty for their sin. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against a fellow Israelite, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." And so all throughout this passage, God commands his people to value one another, to treat one another with respect. And their motivation for this is their respect for God. You can see how Jesus takes these two commandments, he puts them together. Our love for God leads to our love for others. So really these two commandments are one commandment in two parts. And then finally, we have the third element, which is to live missionally, to live on mission. Jesus says in Matthew 4:19, back to the call of the disciples, he says, "I will send you out to fish for people." Now, we've already seen in Matthew 28 that Jesus sends his disciples out into the nations to make disciples, to make more followers of Jesus. Now, those of us who are followers of Jesus, our mission is to serve the world. Our mission is to go into all the world with the message of Jesus. Now, this might sound daunting, but Jesus is calling us to think about the big picture mission, to reach the world for Christ. He's calling us to serve, to see that big picture and to serve those around us. All of us are pursuing this mission together. All of us together can accomplish it if we live on mission, if we live missionally. So together, we're going to learn what it looks like to be a disciple. We're going to take Jesus' command seriously. We're going to take it seriously to make disciples of all nations. And as we close today, I just want to get a little personal. I don't know where you are spiritually. I know we're all in different places, different people watching this video. Discipleship looks a little different for each one of us because we come from diverse backgrounds. We're all different from one another. However, that first step is always the same for each one of us. Discipleship starts with salvation through Jesus' work on the cross. The first step is trusting Jesus for salvation and choosing to follow him. So if you haven't yet taken that step, maybe you just came across this video, I don't know. But I'm just encouraging you, today is the day to do that. When we accept Jesus' payment on our behalf by grace through faith, we are transformed. We're not just a better version of ourselves. We are something entirely new. Discipleship isn't some self-help strategy. It's not a resolution to be a better person. This is all about surrendering to Jesus and letting him transform you from the inside out. This is about Jesus coming into your life and changing everything. Jesus made relational discipleship central to his mission. And so we need to make relational discipleship central to our mission. It's time to move forward together.